benefits exist for future retirees. And again, there's always talk in Congress about getting things done. This has been an absolutely tragic failure of the Congress that you're in right now of getting anything done, and no changes are being made. We cannot wait with the debt that's being racked up right now, especially through this COVID crisis, any longer to start making our programs solvent and make sure that they last well into the future.
Congressman Harder.
Look, you can't evade the responsibility for your own words and actions. You have said repeatedly to the Turlock Journal, right here, on debate forums, online, that you would raise the retirement age to 70. I think you need to take responsibility for that. I don't know if you were lying then or lying now, but I think it's pretty clear that voters can't trust a word you're saying. The reality is, raising the retirement age to 70 would be devastating in a region where we have so many seniors living Social Security paycheck to paycheck. I, on the other hand, will do nothing to hurt Social Security or Medicare. You have hauled Medicare on the record. You called Medicare a nightmare. Medicare, which would save the lives, which is critical to so many seniors across our area. And I think that's not the representation that the Valley is looking for.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to move on to our third question, which is our first community submitted pre-recorded question. And we will be running that.
I'm Jeffrey Lewis, president of Legacy Health Endowment. Long-term care for America's growing elderly population is a critically important issue for Congress to address. Recent polling shows that a majority of California residents don't feel that the state is prepared to take care of its aging population. According to current estimates, over 2/3 of elderly Americans will need long-term care assistance at some point in their lives. At upwards of $60,000 annually and growing, long-term care costs can quickly exhaust personal savings. And compounding the problem, nothing is being done to protect middle-class retirees. If elected or re-elected, please share with us what your plan is to help protect middle-class families from going bankrupt because of rising long-term care costs.
All right, Congressman Harder, you are up first for this question.
Well, the first thing we need to do to protect our seniors is not cut Medicare and Social Security like my opponent is looking to do. But beyond that, we have to address the costs of why so many seniors across our community are having to face some difficult decisions about whether or not to fulfill their next prescription drug benefit or whether or not they can go and get groceries for that week. We need to lower the cost of prescription drugs. I voted for a bill that would do just that. Right now, diabetics in our community are paying 11 times the cost of insulin here in the Central Valley that folks in Australia are paying and in other countries across the developed world. That's unacceptable. I voted for a bill that would give Medicare the ability to negotiate directly with these pharma companies and hold their feet to the fire. That bill would lower the cost of prescription drugs by 75%. It would go a long way towards addressing some of the costs that our seniors are dealing with here in the Valley. The second thing that I've been working on is nursing homes. We saw just a mile away from my home here in Turlock, the Turlock Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, which had an unfortunate incident where one employee got COVID. Within a couple weeks, more than 100 staff members and residents got sick. We need to protect our loved ones in these nursing homes. I hand-delivered masks and gloves to that nursing home, and then I've gone further. I've actually written a bill, the Nursing Home Safety Act, that would prioritize testing in our nursing homes, that would put protective equipment, masks and gloves, in the hands of these workers to keep them safe, and then that would also create task force to make sure that infection disease protocols are being followed in these places. Those are the sorts of things that we need to be doing to keep our seniors safe from this pandemic and for anything else that could be around the corner.
Thank you, Mr. Howze.
Listen, Josh, it doesn't matter how many times you tell people I'm going to cut Social Security and Medicare. It's just not true, right? Medicare is a great program. It's a program my own parents rely upon. When I've talked about the problems with Medicare and when I say it's a nightmare, I'm not talking about the program and the help it gives our seniors. What I'm talking about is the fee-for-service billing model, which makes the whole program subject to absolute abuse. You know, there's a story about a doctor in Florida who had a terminal patient, and he kept poking his head in every day just to see how she was doing. You know, the family thought it was really nice of him until they figured out she was being charged for a doctor's visit every time he poked his head in the door. That's not right. This fee-for-service model is broken. We have got to develop a new model on a flat fee service that makes sure we eliminate these fee-for-services. Again, the program's terrific, and our seniors need it, and I support it wholeheartedly. What I want to do is make sure this program is there for not only today's seniors, but for seniors in the next generation and generations after that. I'm not far from being there myself. So, you know, I don't want to see any program go away that genuinely helps people in this Valley community. So again, you could say it all you want, and you can Photoshop as many pictures of me with scissors, which is pretty disingenuous. The argument doesn't carry. The Valley knows the difference. They know what I stand for. We've had tens of thousands of conversations at the door. They understand that we're going to protect these programs at all costs. We're going to make them more cost effective, and we're going to make sure that seniors get more services before it's done.
Congressman Harder, your rebuttal?
Well, for one thing, I don't think that actually answered the question about long-term care whatsoever. But regardless, it's not me saying that you want to cut Social Security and raise the retirement age on Social Security until 70. That stuff that you said, it's on the record. And again, I think the flip-flopping can be a little bit dizzying for those of us that are watching your campaign. But the results stand. It can be hard to know if you're lying then or lying now, but the results are pretty clear that Social Security and Medicare would not be protected if you are elected to Congress.
And I go back to, you know, you're the most disingenuous kind of politician because you can't even have an honest discussion about any issue for fear that it may come back to be used against you in a campaign. I'm willing to go and sit in front of people and have honest discussions about all options on the table. That doesn't mean you're committed to destroying a program. I've said it very clearly, and I'll say it right here again tonight, right in everybody's face. Medicare is a great program. I want to see it continue. I want to fix the fee-for-service model and make sure that the program is funded for decades to come for all future American retirees.
All right, thank you so much. Now we're going to move on. Mr. Howze, what do you think is the best way to secure water resources for the Central Valley?
Well, I think the first thing is to take an honest approach to water. I mean, this is the only positive ad my opponent's running. It's all negative except for the water ad. And the reality is, he says, I've secured the first new water storage for the Valley in X number of years. The reality is even water experts, Wayne Lasvardi wrote a big article, and he is a water expert, that says that my opponent passed a waterless water storage plan. That you cannot get anything passed here in California to create new water storage because they put a poison pill into the language of every bill. When Ken Calvert tried to pass 2 amendments through the 2021 infrastructure bill to get money to raise Shasta Dam, which would have provided more water for the Valley, yourself and TJ Cox killed that in committee. So he even called you out for it. He said, we've got California Democrats who talk water, but then they don't perform. So I think the beginning is actually not just paying lip service to water, but actually trying to fight to bring more water storage in California. We need new dams. We have to build new dams up here in these Sierras, and we've got to hold this water back that's running out to the ocean every year. The flows that are going to the ocean could be saved to help our farmers. And if we raise just the spillway at Don Pedro, just the spillway, we could save enough water, extra water in Don Pedro to serve MID and TID for a year. But that's not happening because the environmentalists that control my opponent's party will not let anything be done with water here in the Central Valley.
Congressman Harder.
Water's the lifeblood of the Valley. It's the reason my great-great-grandfather settled here in 1850 to start a peach farm in Manteca, because we have the best soil, the best water in the entire world. But our water security is constantly being threatened, and we've had decades of paralysis, fights between farmers and environmentalists. And the Valley has been on the losing end of most of those efforts. We have not had new federal funding for a new water storage project in the Valley since Don Pedro Dam was completed 5 decades ago, until last year, when I helped secure the first federal funding for a new water storage project. Now, my opponent is spending more time listening to op-ed columnists from Los Angeles than talking to farmers in our community right here. I'd recommend that you go out and actually open your ears. You'll hear that we've gotten more done on water in the last 2 years than in the last 20. Go talk to Anthea Hansen, the head of Del Puerto Water District. Go talk to anybody at Modesto Irrigation District, Turlock Irrigation District, any farmer on the west side who will tell you all of the progress that we've made. We have a long way left to go, but the fact that we now have the first water funding in 50 years is not a waterless water bill. That's a sign of progress. And the way we got that done is working with Republicans and Democrats. We can't have any more of this divisive politics, pitting folks against each other. We actually have to work together. And that's the shame. That's why I think if my opponent is elected, he's not going to get much done. His campaign isn't even supported by the Republicans in Congress. If they don't want you to be there, then if you actually do end up there, you're not going to get progress for the Valley on water or any other issue.
Mr. Howze, your
So
rebuttal?
I've met with Althea. I've been out to the Del Puerto Water District. You haven't secured federal money for anything other than an environmental impact report, because that's a private project going to build that dam. Half the people in Patterson are up in arms about it because the EIR doesn't make it clear that they're going to be safe below the dam. They're very upset that it's going to cover the third largest bird sanctuary on the West Coast, and it's the reason a lot of Democrats in Patterson are voting for me, Josh. We've spent a lot of time out there learning about this project. They're upset about it. So it's disingenuous for you to say that you've secured a new water project. You've secured money for an environmental impact report for a private project that may never be built in the end. So, but we're used to you taking credit for things you haven't done. We'll touch upon the endorsements here in a little bit.
The person you're referencing, her name is Anthea. So if you want to talk about people you've met, farmers across our community, maybe you should work on getting their names right if you actually want to take credit for that. The reality is, yes, we have a lot of work to do on water. There's no question. The reason it's been 50 years since we had a water project completed in the district is because it's very difficult to do. All I'm saying is we've made more progress in the last 2 years than in the 20 years before. The first federal funding for a new water project. We have a lot more room left to go. But we have support to make sure that we are not only building Del Puerto, but expanding Los Vaqueros near Tracy, nearly doubling the size of that project, getting support for North Valley Water Recycling Project, and others. These are the signs of life. And if your response is, oh, these projects don't matter, then I think you should spend a little bit more time talking to farmers in our district before you oppose the best chance we've had about new water storage in 50 years.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Now on to our next question. Congressman Harder will be the first person to answer this question. What do you think the government should be doing regarding climate change?
A lot more, or maybe something. I think the reality is we have seen wildfires across our community this year like never before. I had a chance to go up with the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department in their helicopter and survey some of the damage that happened over Diablo Grande and Del Puerto Canyon. And it's heart-wrenching. Those fires got over 300,000 acres right there. They went all the way to I-5, threatening the cities of Patterson and Newman. If they had gone just a couple miles further, we would have lost a lot of really critical houses across our area, if not some lives. And we have to address the root causes of why these wildfires are happening with increasing frequency, which is the threat of climate change. Now, I know my opponent is a climate denier, wants to put his head in the sand and not actually face the scientific reality we have in front of us, but things are getting drier. I sponsored the Farm Act, which is an effort to bring together farmers and environmentalists and talk about things that we can actually work together on. If we put a methane digester on every single dairy farm just here in California, that's the equivalent of taking 5 million cars off the road. That can make a lot of progress. That's the right thing to do, and there's scores of other ideas just like that. Initiatives that can create more income for struggling farmers, as well as address the underlying root cause of why these fires are happening all over. What we've seen over the past few months cannot be the new normal for the Central Valley.
Thank you. Mr. Howze?
Listen, I've said repeatedly that we all need to be good stewards of our environment, but we also need to take responsibility for things that we are just destroying via bad policy. I spent 7 years as a firefighter, Josh. I spent a lot of time in the foothills fighting forest fires. I can tell you the first thing that we did at any fire was look for the nearest logging road as a fallback position. We are not taking care of our forests, either state or federal. We need to come back to logging as a responsible practice and thin our forests. That would stop a lot of these wildfires that you guys want to point to because of your environmentalist backers as being completely caused by global warming. It's not. It's not all global warming. It's a lot of bad policy from Democrats in Sacramento. That's number one. Number two, listen, we need to invest. We need to give incentives to companies to create new technologies, new green technologies, and work that through an economic incentive route. Not just the heavy hammer of you're going to stop doing this next year, and leaving an economically depressed valley to find ways to cope with the costs that you want to impose on them. I know that the mandates for solar in the Central Valley are a big part of what's making housing unaffordable. Are we going to stop everybody from buying combustion engine vehicles and into electric vehicles, which are expensive? Again, that's not good policy. Let's find a way to meet environmental improvement through economic development, through good policy, and not through just the heavy hand of government.
Congressman Harder?
We're not going to get anything done if you put your head in the sand and don't actually accept the scientific reality of climate change that's before us. We have forest management problems, absolutely, and a lot more has to be done. That's why I've supported a bill with Senator Feinstein that would do a much better job of getting controlled burns throughout our forests, improving our forest management, and helping make sure that as things continue to get warmer, that we can actually address some of the other challenges that are coming from those warmer summers. But we also have to address that root cause, and we can do it in a way that creates more income for farmers. Things like methane digesters and other features of agricultural sustainability that instead of putting the burden on folks can actually create opportunities. And you say it's too expensive. I say, you know what's really expensive is the wildfire season that we had throughout California this year. Billions of dollars of damage, lives lost, houses destroyed. If you think that this should be the new normal for the next several years, I think that's not an acceptable answer.
Mr. Howze?
I didn't say that. Thanks for putting words in my mouth. I said that we need to adopt good practice. Selective logging would be a good first step to that. That's something we can do today. It's something that provides timber to an industry that needs it. It would help us lower home costs. So I think you make an assumption that because somebody wants to take a practical approach, it doesn't meet your Green New Deal approach. It's not, the heavy-handed government is not always the best approach.
Thank you. Now for our next question, and Mr. Howze will be the first to answer this question. Do you support the extension of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals or DREAMers legislation? Why or why not?
Look, I've been on record. There's tapes from 2018, you can go back and look, saying I absolutely support giving dreamers who signed up under the provisions of DACA a pathway to citizenship. And I think as part of an overall reform package of immigration, we should freeze all of their statuses in place, stop scaring them that they're going to face action, and when we get immigration reformed, they should get a place in line to earn citizenship immediately. I've coached dreamers. I've had them on my own football teams. We as taxpayers are paying to educate these people. They're as many of them as American as any of us. And we need to absolutely, if they've done the right thing, paid the fees, signed up under the program, we need to live up to our end and not change the rules and give them a pathway to citizenship.
Thank you. Congressman Harder?
Look, immigrants are the heart and soul of this valley. Open your eyes as you're driving through. You'll see that that's the heart and soul of where we are. I briefly taught at Modesto Junior College. One of my students was a dreamer, working 2 part-time jobs, wanted to grow up, live the American dream, be a pharmacist, one of the best products of our community. But she was carried over the border when she was just 3 months old. She doesn't know what her future holds even today. there are 10,000 kids with stories just like that right here in the Valley. That's why I co-sponsored and voted for the DREAM Act, a bill that would make sure that that woman and other kids just like her have a pathway to citizenship. That's been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for 2 years. And I think it's unacceptable that people put political interests ahead of the needs of our community. Speaking of which, that's exactly what Mr. Howze has said. He wants to say that he's gone and supported Dreamers. The reality is his social media posts say the exact opposite. Mr. Howze, on February 8th, 2018, you compared Dreamers to pedophiles and called them criminal foreign invaders. In what world do you think representing a diverse community like the Central Valley, calling our immigrants foreign invaders and pedophiles is acceptable?
Mr. Howze?
We did no such thing, Josh, and you know it. Good for you and your Democratic operatives for digging up a hacked Twitter account that you want to make hay out of, and you want to make it. We'll make no defense of it. It wasn't my words. We've said that over and over again. I love that you rotate right around to every attack because you have no other path to victory than to attack us. And it shows. It shows. You have to spend millions of dollars to go on the attack because you have absolutely no support in this valley. None. Go to tedhowze.com. Pull up the list of all of the local endorsements that we have, mayors, police organizations. You will see that the people who know me know what I stand for, what my family stand for. They don't believe that baloney for a minute, Josh, right? Go to Josh's webpage and see who supports him locally. How many mayors? That's right, you work in a congressional district where no mayor supports you. How many police organizations locally? None. That's right. So just keep attacking. Keep spending millions of dollars going on the attack for something that people don't believe for a minute because they know me and they know my family here in this valley.
Mr. Harder?
I encourage folks to go on and actually look up your endorsements. What you'll find is you don't have a single one. You released your endorsements across this area. Until there's any public announcements of new endorsements, I think people have to assume there are none. And the reality is, don't take my word for Mr. Howze's comments. The Republican Party did an investigation. Here's what they found. The chair of the California Republican Party said, and I quote, "Mr. Howze's social media posts are disgraceful, disgusting, and do not represent the values we hold or the party we are building." The head of the National Republican Party denounced and condemned Mr. Howze's remarks. Republicans up and down our community, from Manteca Mayor Ben Cantu to Supervisor Terry Withrow to Mayor Chris Vieira, have unendorsed your campaign. And the reality is, if your own party doesn't want you to serve in Congress, then frankly, why should anybody else?
Okay.
Wait, no. I'm going to respond to this because he's outright lied.
Well, then
okay?
he gets another response
then you
to
can
you.
let him have it. Typical, because you don't know the valley, Josh. You really don't. Ben Cantu is still endorsing us. So's Chris Vieira. There are 10 mayors on my endorsement list on my webpage listed. Go right now, tedhowze.com. You can do it in the room. There are 10 mayors on the list endorsing me. Today, we spent the entire day dropping Republican lists from endorsements for us from county and state parties. You can talk, you don't know what you're talking about. The state party, I never asked for the endorsement of the California State Republican Party, did not want to receive it, and I don't lick the boots of DC and Sacramento party elders. You do. You do. You can lick Nancy Pelosi's boots all you want and vote with her 97% of the time. With Ted Howze, Valley voters get somebody who's independent enough to vote for what they believe is the right thing.
Look, you can try to evade responsibility for your comments all you want. The reality is, you signed your name to these posts. You tagged your own children. You commented in the responses below. And these comments are repulsive and do not represent the values of the Valley. When you call a victim of a school shooting a hoax, when you call Dreamers pedophiles and foreign invaders, that doesn't represent the Central Valley. That doesn't represent the Republican Party. And again, these are not my words. Listen to Republican leaders across our community and across the country. They have fled Ted Howze's campaign faster than you can imagine, calling his comments disgusting and disgraceful. That's not the representation we need in the Valley. That doesn't represent our values. It also means, since you have been denounced and condemned by your own party, that if by some miracle you show up in Washington, you wouldn't be able to accomplish anything. No one will work with someone who has made comments like you have.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move on to our second pre-recorded question from a community member.
Hi, my name is Jessica Silva, and I am an editor for the Stan State Signal student newspaper, and I am also a senior in political science major. I had a question in regards to financial assistance for students, in particular at Stan State, but also ones that plan on going to Stan State. I know with the recent pandemic, a lot of them have maybe lost their jobs themselves, or their families that support them may have also lost their jobs. And also with the stress of the pandemic moving all the classes to online, it has caused a lot of stress on students. And I know some of their grades may have slipped. I myself experienced this, and so that does lose qualifications for some scholarships. I was wondering what you guys plan on doing to advocate to get more financial assistance for students. Because I am aware that the CSU chancellor and the board also advocates for student assistance, but I feel there needs to be more voices to advocate for this, as if the pandemic slows down next year, a lot of students will be facing this particular challenge when wanting to continue their education or go on to get their education at Stan State.
All right, Congressman Harder, you're first up for this question.
There's no question that college is unaffordable in the Valley. And I've spoken to a lot of students at Stan State. I've spoken to a lot of my former students and other folks at MJC, and costs are continuing to rise, but support is not. Pell Grants have not risen with the cost of inflation. That's why more than 70% of folks across the country graduate with debt, on average $30,000 a year. That's an enormous debt burden. It not only has the impacts of stress that you highlighted, it also has an impact on the career that you take. We have to do better. I think we should be working on two things. First, we have to make sure that we are fixing the Pell Grant system and allowing those Pell Grants to rise as the cost of education has gone up. And then second, we have to bring back proven programs that work. When I went to college, not that long ago, I had a chance to work on federal work study. I worked 20 hours a week, all 4 years of college. It wasn't glamorous. I was answering phones, moving boxes, but I got an income that was supported by the federal work study program. The program that I benefited from has been cut by 90% because of Betsy DeVos and the Trump administration's efforts to reduce higher education funding. We need to make sure that all the folks across the Valley, many of our college students work 1 or 2 jobs while they're going to school, and we need to do a much better job of making sure that they have the financial support around them.
Mr. Howze?
I was one of those students. Thank goodness for an education. I grew up in a family that definitely was not wealthy. I paid my way through school working as a firefighter and EMT. I know how tough it is to work and try to go to school at the same time. We agree here, a lot of middle ground on education, because I think we absolutely have to raise Pell Grant limits. They're too low for our students. And then secondly, interest rates. You know, it's always amazed me that a business can walk in and borrow money at well below prime rate, but our students get charged just absolutely astronomical rates on student loans. And I think that we need to work to set a cap somewhere below prime rate on our student loans. And work study, agree 100%. We've got to get that program reinstituted. I think we've got to give students every opportunity to pursue an education, not get out in smothering debt, because I myself have walked that same path, and without the education I earned, I never would have been able to have gotten to where I am at this point in life. So education is important to me, and obviously my wife is a teacher. I've spent a lot of time coaching in the school systems. I think it's a fundamental building block to success for most people in this country.
One of the other things we need to do is we need to make it a lot easier to have a path to the middle class that doesn't even include college. Right now, if you go and get a 4-year philosophy degree, you can get a federal scholarship for that. But if you want to be a maintenance mechanic, you cannot. And that's a shame, because right here in the Valley, a maintenance mechanic is a good living. It can pay $100,000 a year or more, and we have a huge shortage of them across the area and other skilled professions just like that. I spoke to some of our business leaders recently, and they talked to me about all the folks that they would like to hire if they could. That's why I introduced a bill to make sure that you can get this, the same federal scholarship that you can get for a 4-year degree, you should be eligible for to get a high-quality, short-term certificate that'll lead to a good-paying job like being a maintenance mechanic.
Mr. Howze?
I agree. I think we need to invest in educations for people who don't necessarily want to go to a 4-year college. We have a great program right here in Stanislaus County in the Volt Institute. We have been working to try to find a location in San Joaquin County to mirror that program up there, because I think that gives young people who just don't want to go to college a great opportunity to make themselves available for trades. And we need them. I mean, every time it gets hot here in the Valley, try to find an air conditioner repairman. It's tough, and you can make a great living. So I would like to see us expand those opportunities even further here in the Central Valley and give people an opportunity who want to live and work here and raise their families to stay.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to move on, and Mr. Howze will be the first to answer this question. Given the numerous protests we've seen in Turlock and around District 10 this year, how would you aim to bridge the divide when it comes to current racial tensions, both locally and nationwide? Mr. Howze?
Well, I think first of all, we've got to come to a common ground. I think especially with George Floyd's death, that anybody who watched that happen, we could all agree that was horrific, and the officers involved in that case should absolutely be charged. We have great law enforcement officers, but there are bad eggs in every profession. But then the protests started, and in overwhelming action that just turned out to be violent in many of our communities, the momentum was lost to make fundamental changes. I believe that we don't throw out all of our good police officers just because a few are bad. And we have to condemn the violence that's happening in our cities. I know my opponent, when a bill was brought before the U.S. Congress, they were trying to condemn the violence, get additional funding for police officers. We talk about bipartisanship. Democrats unanimously killed that before it could become law. I think that we have to support good officers, and at the same time we have to recognize that we need more training. Defunding the police is probably the worst idea I've ever heard of, because defunding the police means we lay off older officers through golden parachutes. It means we hire more younger officers at local levels, and pretty soon defunding equates to younger forces with less training, and we have more incidents happening. I think if anything, we need additional funding for additional training, and we work to reconcile the differences between our communities and make sure everybody agrees that law and order is good, but it has to occur in a manner which we do not single out anybody in our community just because of the color of their skin.
Congressman Harder?
We need to do a much better job restoring trust between law enforcement officers and the communities that they serve. It's clear that that trust has been broken. And there's a lot of common ground here. I voted for a comprehensive police reform bill that would do a number of different common sense reforms, including banning chokeholds, making sure that we are creating a national universal standard of force, and then also ensuring that there is accountability when that use of force is abused by creating a national oversight board to make sure that every officer, every public servant across this country is held to a high standard of behavior. The vast majority of our police officers are doing an incredibly difficult job as well as they can. But of course, there are bad apples, and we need to do a much better job of rooting those folks out and ensuring that they face accountability for their actions when necessary. I've worked a lot with police officers, police chiefs across our district. I sponsored a bill that is all around helping our police officers deal with homelessness. When I go on ride-alongs right here in Turlock and across our community, I hear from a lot of police officers who tell me that the number one thing that they're dealing with right now is our homeless problem. And we do not have a good solution through law enforcement. You arrest somebody, you take them to the emergency room or to jail for 24 hours, and then the next day they're back on the streets. That's not the right way. We have to make sure that we're doing better, and that's why I supported, actually wrote a bill that would put social workers into police departments across our community so we can be helping our homeless folks the right way and have social workers work with police officers to address the mental health issues and the substance abuse issues that have led to folks being on the street in the first place. That's why I've been supported by the largest law enforcement group here in California.
Mr. Howze?
I believe the question was about how do we reconcile the protests and the unrest that we're having, and that is not only talking about our good police officers and singling out the bad ones, but it's also disavowing protesters that are burning our cities, our major cities in this country, which is something you've been unwilling to do to this point, Josh. Now, I think it's great that you talk about the largest law enforcement group in California endorsing you. That's a Sacramento Union group. They have no tie to our district. Listen, I'm endorsed by police organizations here within the district. How many are you endorsed by in the district? I'd love you to answer that question. Well, the answer is 0, so I'll save you the time, right? We're endorsed by multiple in the district. So I think when it comes to knowing our officers here locally, what our valley needs and representing them, I will let their endorsements speak for themselves.
Congressman Harder?
Well, of course, I hope we both condemn violence in any form. And that's has to be a core objective. We need to be working on both sides to address the core problem here, which is the lack of trust between law enforcement and those communities that they serve. And the news that the largest law enforcement office group in California doesn't have folks in this area would be news to all the police officers that I've met with who are members of PORAC and other groups just like that. The reality is there is only one person across America of any political party who has been asked by the NAACP, which is a nonpartisan group that never takes sides in political elections, to drop out. And that's Mr. Howze. The NAACP wrote him a letter saying that his bigoted and discriminatory comments should require him to drop out of this race. And the real question is why he's still in it when his party doesn't even want him in Washington.
Okay, now we're going to move on to questions that are submitted by viewers during the debate tonight. And Congressman Harder, you will be the first to answer the first reader submitted or viewer submitted question. This one is from Linda Davenport, who submitted it via email tonight. She says, unfortunately, I have been recognized with a pre-existing condition. How will you protect the services of healthcare providers and the health care to people with pre-existing conditions?
Well, we need to make sure that everyone in the Central Valley can have access to affordable care. That's why I ran for Congress to begin with. My younger brother was born 10 weeks premature, was less than 2 pounds when he was first born. I couldn't even hold my baby brother and get behind the glass in the intensive care unit because of all the tubes coming out of him. And I ran for office because his health care was threatened. If the Affordable Care Act was repealed, my little brother would be without insurance, as would another 100,000 people, just like Linda and others across our community. That remains a fight. The week after Election Day, the Supreme Court is going to hear a case on the Affordable Care Act. And no matter how they decide, we need to push for more legislation to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and ensure that every American can go out and see a doctor. But of course, here in the Valley, just because you have an insurance card doesn't mean a doctor is available. We had 12 resident physicians graduate in Stanislaus County last year. One of them stuck around. 11 of those physicians moved away. And I don't fault somebody for having $500,000 in medical school debt and working in private practice where they can make a living, but we need more physicians here. That's why I wrote a bill that would create a loan forgiveness program for physicians working in areas of need. That program will lead to 10,000 doctors in our area and across the country. It's a perfect example of bringing together Republicans and Democrats. I've sponsored more bills with Republicans than any other Democrat in the country, And this is a perfect example of why. We got support from folks who chaired the Bernie Sanders campaign, and then we also got support from Louis Gohmert from Texas, probably the most conservative Republican in the House of Representatives, because he knew that bringing doctors to his district would be beneficial for him and his constituents just as much as it would benefit us. And then we have to make sure that we continue to fight to lower the cost of prescription drugs.
Thank you. Mr. Howze?
Listen, healthcare is probably the largest reason I got involved in this race also. Many understand that the loss of my first wife to a health insurance company that was unwilling to pay for the testing she needed to diagnose her treatable heart condition is the legacy of part of why we want to fix healthcare in the name of her, in her legacy. I have prepared a detailed health insurance plan, or healthcare plan. It's on my website, tedhowze.com. Go there. It's long. You can read it there to your heart's content. But this is a large difference between my opponent and I. I see healthcare as a number of options that we can fix to offer affordable, available healthcare that covers pre-existing conditions to every American, regardless of income level. My opponent wants to institute a complete government overhaul or a complete government control of healthcare, and his $32 trillion plan over 10 years has been called I want to make sure I get the words right, hollow promises by his fellow Democrat Jim Costa in Fresno. We need to fix healthcare without absolutely bankrupting our country. I have a plan that would do that. It also would not take away private healthcare insurance from 170 million Americans. That's 170 million Americans that receive health insurance from their employer as a non-tax benefit. My opponent would replace your health insurance with a program that you would then be taxed for. You would be paying for it, not your employer. I think that we have to save private health care insurance. We have to have options for Medicare that allow people to enroll if they want to avail themselves of that program. And then we have to find a way to provide services through Medicaid block granting to the states that allows people who cannot afford anything else to receive care in their states.
Congressman Harder?
Well, look, I'm not trying to take away private health insurance, and I don't know anybody who is. The reality is my opponent did not mention his opposition to the Affordable Care Act. We're in the midst of a public health emergency right now. 1,000 folks are dying across the country every single week. We saw the president get sick, and he luckily had the best health care available. He got a rapid test, was taken to Walter Reed Hospital. My wife and I are praying for him. We hope that he gets better as quickly as possible. But every American should be entitled to that same standard of care. And we haven't done that until we can actually accelerate testing for this pandemic. Right now, through the CARES Act, which my opponent opposed, we got testing turnaround times here in the Valley from 2 weeks to 2 days. That's a lot of progress, but we still have a lot more room left to go. And then we also need to make sure that when a vaccine is available, it is free and accessible for every American.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Howze?
Let's be clear. Your Medicare for All plan is a $32 trillion plan that would abolish private health care. All you have to do is listen to the members of your own party that say so, Josh. And again, your own members of your party say it's hollow promises. So the Affordable Care Act, listen, the whole goal is great, to make sure every American's covered. I want to do that. I want to make sure every American gets coverage for pre-existing conditions. But the ACA is a program stuck in limbo right now that needs to be addressed and fixed for all Americans.
All right, thank you. And I need to make a clarification that apparently these questions from the readers are not from just tonight, but the questions I'm reading are submitted from readers over the past couple of weeks also. So I'm going to move on to the second reader submitted question or viewer submitted question. How do you plan on tracking homelessness in District 10? This was submitted by Kimberly Trigo on Facebook. And Mr. Howze?
Listen, tracking homelessness, most of our law enforcement know every homeless member in their community on a first name basis and what their issues are. We do not have a quote unquote homelessness issue in this district. We have a criminal vagrancy issue. And the reality is, until we enable our law enforcement to go back to enforcing quality of life laws and getting our homeless off the streets and into diversionary programs, and ultimately following that into job training programs and give them a path back to active participation in our community, we can throw all the money at homelessness we want, and we will never change the situation. It's as simple as the old axiom of teaching a person to fish versus giving them a fish. My plan would call for stopping funding of simply feeding and housing the homeless. I would take that money and reroute it into making sure that we allow our officers to enforce quality of life laws. They do the triage. We offer individuals in the homeless community an opportunity to avail themselves of drug treatment, of alcohol therapy, of mental health facilities, and those have to be funded. We need to fund them with what we are just throwing away on simply feeding people right now. There are a lot of good programs in the community that will take care of that. We need to invest government money into diversionary programs, transitional housing, and job trainings, so we give people a second chance in life to become productive members of society.
Congressman Harder?
Look, we have an urgent homelessness problem across the Central Valley. I remember when I used to drive to high school, to Modesto High, I would drive over the 7th Street Bridge and I would see almost no homeless folks. Now when you make that exact same drive, you see them everywhere. And there's two reasons why. One is the cost of housing. Right now it costs $500,000 across California to buy a new house. That's completely unaffordable for the vast majority of residents in the Central Valley. And second, we have an epidemic of mental health and substance abuse. And until we address those root causes of why so many folks have ended up on the streets, we're not going to get them out. That's why I've been working on both of those. I put forward a bill to create a federal emergency on homelessness. Think about all the wildfires that we've seen across California this year. Every time a house burns down, FEMA gets involved. They go in, they help that family get back on their feet, building a new home. That's great. But if we can do that for wildfire victims, why can't we do it for the hundreds of thousands of people who are sleeping on our streets every single day? That's on the housing side. And then we also have to address this mental health and substance abuse problem. I talked about my bill to give social workers embedded in police officers and in police departments. So instead of having a cop with a badge and a gun showing up to a homeless person, you have somebody that can actually get that person access to the help that they need. It doesn't help anybody to have a homeless person get recycled through an emergency room or through a jail and back on the street the next day. We have to get folks the help that they need to get back on their feet for good.
Mr. Howze?
Here's the reality. Until we start enforcing quality of life laws, listen, our district attorneys in a lot of these counties, our own governor, I know who you're fond of, will not enforce our laws. Essentially, people can walk into a grocery store and steal $900 worth of food, and if they walk out and it's under a certain level, there's no prosecution. We are creating an atmosphere of lawlessness in the state of California because the ruling single-party control we have in Sacramento won't do anything about holding people accountable for their actions. We can talk about funding all we want, but until we begin enforcing quality of life laws as the first step, we will never turn around the homelessness in this state.
Congressman Harder? Look, Mr. Howze seems to think that somehow we can arrest ourselves out of the homeless epidemic that's around us. I don't think arresting somebody for being on the streets somehow gets them off the streets the next day. They're just going to be back in that same place. We have to make sure that we are getting them the help that they need, access to those mental health and substance abuse services, and building more homes. The Valley is growing at 3 times the pace of the rest of California. More folks are moving here because they can't afford to live anywhere else, and we have to build the housing to accommodate that. I wrote a bill that would lift federal taxes on new housing construction temporarily here in the Valley. That would make sure that we're finally building the housing stock that's necessary. And it would have an ancillary benefit of putting people back to work, building the homes that our community so desperately needs.
Okay, thank you. Now on to our next community submitted question. This one is from Jamie Ellison, who submitted the question via Facebook, and Congressman Harder will be the first to answer. Where do you stand on bringing developers and big tech to the Valley?
Look, we need more jobs here in the Valley. Wake up 7 a.m., 8 a.m., any Monday morning and look on 99 and 205. And a non-pandemic when folks aren't working from home, what you'll see is you'll see 86,000 people that are commuting over the Altamont Pass for work every single day. Folks with jobs in the Bay Area that can't afford to live there, and so they have to live out here. And we need to do two things. First, we need to make sure that we are creating more transportation resources. I'm very fond of a program that would expand BART from where it terminates in Dublin right now over the Altamont Pass to Tracy, Manteca, hopefully eventually to Modesto, even Turlock, to make sure that we can get mass transit to get people where they're going. Building a bullet train up and down California doesn't solve the problem. There's not a lot of folks commuting to Bakersfield. There's a lot of people commuting to San Jose and San Francisco. And we need to make sure that we have the transportation resources to help them. But then second, the long-term solution, the only long-term solution here is making sure that we are building more jobs in the Valley. And that's where education really comes in. I've spoken to so many of our employers across the area. They've told me they want to hire locally. They have job openings. But one of our largest employers just had to open a satellite location in Livingston because they couldn't find the qualified employees right here in the Valley. That's why I put together a skills education package that would make sure that we are connecting local employers, our best local employers, to our school system, to our high schools, our community college, to Stan State, and make sure that the folks that we're teaching in our school system are being prepared for jobs right here in the Valley so they don't have to drive 4, 5, 6 hours a day for a job somewhere else.
Thank you. Mr. Howze?
Listen, jobs are probably one of the largest component of what I've talked about over the last 2 years. I have a track record as an elected official of creating jobs out on the west side of Turlock. There is an absolute model in redevelopment zones to be able to do that without raising taxes on people. The development pays for itself long term. The answer, I think, is establishing federal, state, and local redevelopment agencies again. Letting people in the Valley take control over developing the jobs that are unique to their community. In Turlock here for us, it was high-tech agricultural manufacturing. We're blessed in the Valley in many respects. We do have water. We do have relatively inexpensive electricity through TID and MID. We have the ability to expand. We have one of the largest trunks of T1 lines running down our rail system here in the Central Valley that we could naturally use to tap into high tech. I think these are all things that we should do. I was tired of, as a coach, of watching kids after practice have no family to go home to and have dinner with because their parents have gone over the hill for work. We have to, especially if we want to help Valley families, bring the jobs here. And we cannot build enough trains and lanes to get that done. We've got to find innovative solutions, and we've got to make building jobs within our communities easy and effective.
Congressman Harder?
Look, there are programs that work. I was able to help secure a new funding grant for the Volt Institute, which is a really important apprenticeship program here in Stanislaus County. Recently, I was over at Ceres High, or back when school was in session, so I guess it was a while ago. But one of the programs that I observed over at Ceres High was a program that taking kids that were at risk of dropping out and teaching them critical skills. How to install a solar panel, how to drive a forklift, how to operate a robot in a manufacturing environment. Those kids graduate from that program, they get a job the day after graduation for $15 an hour or more. That's a huge success story. There are programs just like that. They need the support to scale up. Those programs shouldn't be available just to a small percentage of students in our community. They should be available to everyone, and they should be diverse and focused on the full breadth of employment opportunities here in the Valley. We have employers that want to hire. We just need to make sure that they're having the skilled folks that can do those jobs.
Thank you. And Mr. Howze?
I think we agree that jobs are important, and I think that's one of the reasons that I am absolutely excited about the endorsements of all the mayors in this district, 10 of them, because the people that have the greatest impact on the daily quality of life of residents and cities in this valley, they've seen what I've done here in the community of Turlock. They're excited to work with me as their congressional representative and to help bring jobs for their communities also.
Okay, great. This is now the last question of the evening. It's the last community submitted question, and it's the last question of the evening, and after that we'll be closing statements. And Mr. Howze, you'll be the first person answering the last question. It was submitted by Lauren Menard via Facebook.
Okay.
Stanislaus County is a COVID hotspot. What will you do if elected to protect essential workers in factories and fields and to prevent another surge?
Well, listen, Lauren, I appreciate the question. I am an absolute firm believer in local control. Nobody knows a community or a region better than local leaders, and we're fortunate to have good ones here in Stanislaus County. So I would take mostly a supportive role, making sure that we work to have the funding necessary, that our local communities and counties have the opportunity to make their own decisions towards what they feel is best for their communities to handle the COVID situation. I'm not the type of person that's going to step on local leaders' toes and tell them how I think they should do it. So I think it's overall being in a supportive role and making sure that we have the funding necessary that our local communities can achieve their goals.
Thank you, Congressman Harder.
The Valley continues to be hit hard by COVID, and we need more help. One of the first things that I did when this pandemic started is I created the Central Valley PPE Initiative, working with Republicans and Democrats up and down the valley to identify local supplies of protective equipment for frontline workers. I was hearing from nurses and doctors who were having to use garbage bags in our clinics and hospitals. That's not acceptable. I worked with Republicans like Assemblymember Heath Flora to make sure that our first responders had the equipment that they need. That worked. We've gotten over 60,000 masks, over 10,000 face shields, gowns, N95 masks, and other critical medical supplies to our frontline responders. More has to be done. I think my first objective is making sure that we are doing a better job on testing. If you go to the Stanislaus County Office of Emergency Services, you will see a whole lot of contact tracers. But up until a couple months ago, it was taking 2 weeks to get those test results back. You can't do contact tracing. You can't get this pandemic under control if it's taking 2 weeks to figure out if somebody who's been exposed is positive or negative. That's why the CARES Act was so important. That funding for testing not only accelerated a vaccine, but it brought those turnaround times to 2 weeks here in the Valley. Ted Howze talks about a supportive role. What he's talking about is being completely absent. He would have voted against the CARES Act, which is the most important initiative that we've had to get this pandemic under control and get people back to work. Now, we need to go again. That bill passed in March. Its funding has dried up across our community, and we need to make sure that we're doing it again to make sure that our small businesses and our hospitals are getting the help that they need throughout this crisis.
Again, the CARES Act was misappropriation of funds for large corporations. It didn't give us all the help that we needed here in the Valley, and we do need more money for local businesses here. But we can't do it by raising the national debt through the roof and giving away taxpayers' funds to non-citizens. We need the money here for residents of the Valley and our local businesses. I'm proud of what we have done during the COVID pandemic. I mean, we have fed tens of thousands of meals to Valley families, been out and had opportunities to work with local leaders who attended many of our Operation Compassion events. We have built solid relationships that will give us great ground to serving this Valley for years to come.
Congressman Harder?
I just want to be clear. The CARES Act saved this Valley through critical pandemic months. It did a lot of good. Not only did it accelerate testing turnaround times, it saved those 70,000 jobs right here in the Valley, 70,000 people that would have gone on unemployment if Mr. Howze had his way. He's talking about a position that is so extreme, it is to the right of President Trump. It is to the right of nearly every single Republican member of Congress who voted for that bill. Every single Republican member of the Senate who voted for that bill. And saying that you wanted it to be different doesn't actually address the fact that when our community had one of the greatest crises that we've ever had, a pandemic hitting us hard, that your opportunity, your decision was to go to lunch and not actually support small businesses that would have gone bankrupt without the support from the CARES Act.
Thank you, gentlemen, for answering all the questions tonight. And we are going to move on to closing statements. You each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. And we're going to start with Congressman Harder.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the Turlock Journal for hosting this event. Thank you to Mr. Howze for showing up. Look, I never thought I'd be in this position. I never thought I'd run for political office. I loved my job in the private sector, but I ran because this community invested very deeply in me. My first job was a paper boy for the Turlock Journal. I was proud to have that job, proud to get the best that our community has to offer. But my biggest responsibility is to remind people in Washington that California is more than San Francisco and Los Angeles. That we have a unique set of needs here in the Valley that often go overlooked and ignored. I focused on a couple of different things. First, being accessible. We did 18 town halls last year, showing up to every pocket of this community, answering questions directly from community members. I focused on being independent, making sure that we're working with Republicans and Democrats as much as we can to get focus on the issues the Valley needs. I've sponsored more bills with Republicans than any other Democrat in the country. Not by compromising on values, but by identifying areas of common ground to make progress on. And we've been effective. We've got the first new water funding for the Central Valley in 50 years. We've got the CARES Act to accelerate testing turnaround times and support our small businesses. And I got a bill done to make sure that our Vietnam veterans affected by Agent Orange, folks like my grandfather, had medical benefits for the first time ever. There's a lot more room left to go. Our Valley has real challenges today, but I've been so honored to have the support of our community for the last 2 years, and I ask for your support again. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Howze.
I'm very fortunate to be of this valley, and this community, serving it in the past, has been the greatest honor of my life. The reality is I'm asking for your vote to serve you in Congress to take our fight for the valley to Washington, D.C. Now, I hear my opponent talk about the valley, and I think, well, he thinks about the San Fernando Valley, where a quarter of his legislation has been sponsored to rename post offices and commemorative coins. I don't work for the San Fernando Valley where my big donor money comes from. I work for you. I will represent you in Congress. This is a fundamental, life-changing election for America down the road. It's an election to decide whether you want to have your voice, American freedoms, a constitution, or whether you want to see big government take over your lives. Government, healthcare, Green New Deals, police departments defunded. You have to make a choice what you want your country to look like in the future. I know what the people in the Valley want this country to look like. It's why I'm endorsed by local elected leaders. It's why 10 mayors say Ted Howze is your pick for Congress. I've been endorsed by local police departments. They've said Ted will keep your family safe. Trust, when you trust the people that trust Ted Howze, that's the way you'll vote. Go to my website, tedhowze.com. You'll see the list of people in this valley who have said Ted's the person you should vote for. I would be honored to have your vote, and I look forward to serving you in the United States Congress in 2021.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Howze and Congressman Harder once again. And that is all for the 2020 California District 10 debate brought to you by the Turlock Journal. Tonight's debate can be viewed at any time on our website at turlockjournal.com as well as our YouTube channel. Thank you to all our viewers tonight, and have a good night.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yay!
Thank you, guys.
Do you feel
I
like
didn't have to yell at the audience once.
Yeah, did you feel like you're being yelled at back there?